The crisp mountain air was a welcome change for Graham, who had left the noise of his busy suburban life far behind. Scaling the jagged peaks of the Rockies had always been his sanctuary, a place where his thoughts could quiet down and his responsibilities seemed far away. With every step upward, his muscles ached, but it was a pain he welcomed, a distraction from the dull routine of being a father and husband. As he reached the summit, Graham was greeted by an unexpected sight. A green camping tent nestled among the rocks, its fabric flapping in the wind. His heart skipped a beat. He had chosen this route specifically because of its isolation. Who could possibly be up here? Before he could ponder further, the tent unzipped, and out stepped a man. Broad-shouldered, sun-kissed, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, the stranger stretched lazily before turning to meet Graham's startled gaze. "Didn't think I'd have company up here," the man said with a smile that felt as warm as the morning sun. "I'm Victor." "I'm Graham," he managed to reply, his voice steady despite the unease creeping in. Victor gestured toward the tent. "The sun's already starting to dip. No way you're making it back down before dark. Why don't you crash here? I've got room in the tent." Graham hesitated. Sharing a tent with a stranger wasn't part of his plan, but the practicalities of the situation were undeniable. He nodded reluctantly. "Thanks. I guess I don't have much of a choice." Little did Graham know, this simple decision would set the stage for a chain of events he could have never anticipated. As the evening deepened, the wind grew colder, and the once clear skies darkened ominously. Graham and Victor sat outside the tent, exchanging casual stories of their adventures. Graham found himself loosening up in Victor's presence, drawn to the man's confidence and easy laughter. "You climb often?" Victor asked, pouring a steaming cup of coffee from his thermos and handing it to Graham. "Not as much as I'd like. Life gets in the way," Graham admitted, taking a sip. Victor chuckled knowingly. "Tell me about it. Sometimes I wish I could just stay out here forever." The wind howled, cutting their conversation short. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the mountain, followed by a deafening rumble of thunder. Both men jumped to their feet. "Storm's rolling in fast," Victor said, his tone sharp with concern. "We need to secure everything." As they scrambled to fortify the tent, the first drops of rain began to fall, quickly escalating into a torrential downpour. The wind whipped violently, threatening to tear the tents apart. "This isn't going to hold," Victor shouted over the roar of the storm. "There's a rock formation nearby. It might be our best bet for shelter." With no time to argue, they grabbed what they could and made a run for it, the storm raging around them. The small cave Victor had mentioned was just big enough for the two of them. They hurried inside, their clothes soaked and their breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of the storm was muffled, but still formidable, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Victor dropped the gear he had managed to salvage and leaned against the wall of the cave, his chest rising and falling heavily. "That was close," he muttered, running a hand through his damp hair. Graham nodded, his own breathing labored. "We're lucky you knew about this spot." "Years of exploring these mountains," Victor said with a grin that quickly faded as he looked at their sparse supplies. "We lost a lot of our gear." Graham's stomach sank. Without their equipment, climbing down would be nearly impossible, especially with the storm showing no signs of letting up. Victor seemed to read his thoughts. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "For now, let's focus on staying warm and dry." As the night wore on, the two men huddled close for warmth, their shared body heat a necessity against the biting cold. Graham tried to ignore the way his heart raced at Victor's proximity, chalking it up to adrenaline. But deep down, a part of him knew it wasn't just the storm that had his pulse quickening. The storm raged for 2 more days, leaving Graham and Victor stranded with dwindling supplies. With no cell service and no way to signal for help, they settled into an uneasy routine. Victor proved to be resourceful, using what little they had to make their situation bearable. He was surprisingly upbeat, cracking jokes and telling stories that often left Graham laughing despite himself. But the close quarters and constant proximity began to take a toll. Every glance lingered a little too long. Every touch felt charged with unspoken tension. Graham tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on their survival. But at night, as they lay side by side, the warmth of Victor's body was impossible to ignore. "Do you ever feel like you're living a lie?" Victor's voice broke the silence one evening, catching Graham off guard. "What do you mean?" Graham asked cautiously. Victor hesitated before answering. "Like there's a part of you you've kept hidden for so long, you're not even sure it's real anymore." The question hung in the air, heavy with implications Graham wasn't ready to confront. The storm's relentless howl outside the cave was a fitting backdrop for the turmoil brewing inside. Graham sat against the jagged rock wall, his arms wrapped around his knees as he stared into the dim glow of their small fire. The reality of their isolation had fully set in, but it wasn't just the lack of supplies or the uncertainty of rescue that troubled him. It was Victor, his presence, his warmth, the way his laughter lingered in the stillness. For days now, the unspoken tension between them had grown, a silent undercurrent that neither had dared to address. Victor, seated on the other side of the cave, was equally restless. His eyes darted toward Graham more often than he'd like to admit, each glance igniting a spark he could no longer ignore. He had always prided himself on his self-control, his ability to compartmentalize his emotions and desires. But something about this man, his vulnerability, his quiet strength, made it impossible to stay indifferent. Victor cleared his throat, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "You think anyone's looking for us yet?" Graham didn't lift his head, his response subdued. "Probably. My wife would have noticed I didn't check in. She's thorough like that." His words were casual, but his tone carried a weight that made Victor pause. "And how do you feel about going back?" Victor asked, his voice soft but probing. The question wasn't just about rescue. It was about everything. Returning to their lives, their roles, their carefully constructed facades. Graham finally looked up, his expression conflicted. "It's complicated. I love my family, but I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions, doing what's expected of me because it's easier than questioning it." Victor nodded, his gaze steady. "I get that. I think a lot of us settle into these lives because it's what we're supposed to want. But what if it's not? What if there's more?" The fire crackled between them, its glow dancing on the cave walls as Graham searched for a response. He wanted to deny it, to push away the feelings Victor's words stirred, but he couldn't. "More, huh? And what does that look like to you?" Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved closer, his movements deliberate yet hesitant, as though testing the fragile boundary between them. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a murmur. "Maybe it looks like this." The air between them thickened, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing down like the storm outside. Graham's heart pounded as Victor leaned in, his face inches away. For a moment, everything else faded. The storm, the cave, their lives outside this mountain. All that mattered was this moment, this connection. When their lips finally met, it was hesitant at first, a question waiting for an answer. But as the kiss deepened, it became something more. A release, a confession, a promise neither was ready to fully understand. The kiss lingered, stretching time as the two men surrendered to the feelings they had buried for so long. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement that something monumental had shifted between them. Graham exhaled shakily, his head leaning against the cold rock as he tried to process what had just happened. Victor, still close enough that their breaths mingled, broke the silence. "I don't know what this means, but I know I don't regret it." Graham's gaze met Victor's, a storm of emotion swirling in his eyes. "I don't either. But it's not supposed to happen. We're not supposed to feel like this." "Says who?" Victor's question was simple, but it carried a weight that made Graham pause. Society? Our families? Ourselves? What if all those rules are wrong? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Graham didn't respond. Instead, he shifted closer, his fingers brushing against Victor's. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. For the first time in years, Graham felt like he wasn't pretending, like he wasn't hiding a part of himself to fit into a mold that no longer felt right. As the night stretched on, they talked in hushed tones, their conversation raw and unfiltered. Victor shared pieces of himself he had never spoken aloud. His frustrations, his fears, his long-buried desires. Graham did the same, finding comfort in Victor's understanding. The connection between them deepened, not just physically, but emotionally, as they discovered parts of themselves they had long suppressed. When sleep finally claimed them, it wasn't with the tension of strangers forced to share a space. It was with the quiet intimacy of two souls who had found solace in each other, even if only for a fleeting moment. The morning brought a sense of clarity, though it was accompanied by the harsh reality of their situation. The storm had eased, but the damage was done. Most of their supplies were gone, and the path down the mountain was too dangerous to navigate without proper gear. They were truly stranded, left to rely on each other for survival. Victor took the lead, his natural confidence shining through as he assessed their options. "We've got enough to last a couple more days, but we'll need to signal for help somehow. Hopefully, someone will spot us before things get worse." Graham nodded, his admiration for Victor growing with each passing hour. Despite the gravity of their predicament, Victor remained calm and resourceful, his determination unwavering. It was a stark contrast to Graham's own self-doubt, yet he found strength in Victor's presence. As they worked together to ration their supplies and fortify the cave, their dynamics shifted. The initial awkwardness between them had melted away, replaced by a quiet camaraderie that felt natural. Their conversations became more frequent, more personal, as they navigated the challenges of their situation. But beneath the surface, the connection they had forged the night before remained. Every touch, every glance carried an unspoken promise, a reminder of the bond they now shared. It was a dangerous game, but neither could bring themselves to stop playing. The second evening brought the storm's return, though its intensity had lessened. Outside, the wind hissed through the cracks in the rocky cliff, while inside the cave, the fire cast flickering shadows that danced against the walls. Graham and Victor sat in silence, their shoulders close but not quite touching. The warmth of the fire was a faint comfort against the biting cold, but it was the unspoken tension between them that truly consumed the space. Victor leaned back against the wall, his arms resting on his knees as he stared into the fire. "You know," he began, his voice low and thoughtful, "when I'm out here, it's the only time I feel like myself, like the person I'm supposed to be." Graham glanced at him, his own thoughts mirroring the sentiment. "I get that. Out here, there's no one to judge you. No one to tell you what you should or shouldn't be." Victor turned his head, his eyes locking with Graham's. "Then why does it feel like we're still hiding? Even now, even here?" His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't just talking about the mountain. He was talking about what had happened between them. Graham exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the fire. "Because it's easier to hide. It's safer. But that doesn't mean it's right." Victor shifted closer, his movements deliberate yet hesitant, as though testing the fragile boundary between them. "And what if hiding isn't enough anymore? What if we want more?" The question wasn't new, but it carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. Graham felt his pulse quicken as Victor's hand brushed against his, the simple touch igniting a spark that neither could deny. He turned to Victor, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't know what more looks like, but I know I'm not ready to let this go." Victor nodded, his expression softening as he reached out, his fingers lacing through Graham's. "Then we don't let it go. We figure it out, one step at a time." The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave, the two men found a sense of peace they hadn't known they needed. As the night stretched on, they talked about their lives, their families, their fears, their dreams, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a future where they didn't have to hide. The third morning brought a break in the storm, and with it, the faint sound of a helicopter cutting through the crisp mountain air. Graham and Victor scrambled to the mouth of the cave, their hearts racing as they spotted the rescue team circling above. Relief washed over them, but it was bittersweet. A stark reminder that their time on the mountain and their time together was coming to an end. As the helicopter landed, the rescue team rushed to greet them, their questions rapid and urgent. Graham and Victor answered as best they could, their words careful and measured. Neither of them mentioned the connection they had forged, the moments of intimacy they had shared. It wasn't out of shame, but out of a need to protect what had become theirs and theirs alone. Victor glanced at Graham as they boarded the helicopter, his expression unreadable. They sat side by side, their shoulders brushing, but neither spoke. The hum of the engine filled the silence, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the cave. Graham felt a pang of loss, a hollow ache in his chest as they soared away from the mountain. He turned to Victor, his voice barely audible above the roar. "What happens now?" Victor's gaze softened, and he reached out, his fingers brushing against Graham's in a subtle but deliberate gesture. "We take it one step at a time." The words were simple, but they carried a promise, a commitment to hold on to what they had found. As the helicopter descended, their lives began to resume, the weight of reality pressing down on them. Graham returned to his family, his routine, his role as a husband and father. But the connection with Victor lingered, a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. Over the weeks that followed, the two men stayed in touch, their conversations filled with a mix of longing and uncertainty. They spoke in hushed tones, their words carefully chosen, but the bond between them only grew stronger. It was dangerous, forbidden, but neither could bring themselves to walk away. For Graham and Victor, the mountain was only the beginning. Weeks turned into months, and the connection between Graham and Victor deepened despite the miles that separated them. Their conversations became a lifeline, a thread that tied them to the freedom they had found on the mountain. But as the weeks passed, the weight of their secret began to take its toll. Graham sat in his car outside his office one evening, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He stared at Victor's name on the screen, his thumb hovering over the call button. His mind raced with 1,000 what-ifs, each one more daunting than the last. But before he could second-guess himself, he pressed the button and brought the phone to his ear. Victor answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Graham, everything okay?" Graham hesitated, his words caught in his throat. But then he thought of the mountain, of the cave, of the moments they had shared. "I need to see you," he said finally, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "In person. I can't keep doing this over the phone." There was a pause on the other end, and Graham could almost hear Victor's mind working. Finally, Victor spoke, his tone resolute. "I'll make it happen. Just tell me where and when." The days leading up to their meeting were a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Graham told his wife he had a work trip, the lie sitting heavy on his conscience. But as he drove to the secluded cabin Victor had rented, the weight began to lift, replaced by a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. When he arrived, Victor was waiting, his smile lighting up the dim evening like a beacon. They embraced, the connection between them as strong as ever. For the first time since leaving the mountain, Graham felt like he could breathe. The weekend passed in a haze of stolen moments and whispered confessions. They laughed, they argued, they explored the depths of their connection in ways they hadn't dared to before. It was messy and imperfect, but it was real. As the sun set on their final evening together, Graham and Victor sat on the porch, their hands intertwined. "This isn't going to be easy," Graham said, his voice tinged with both hope and fear. "But I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Victor squeezed his hand, his gaze unwavering. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and risks. But for Graham and Victor, it was a risk worth taking. Together they had found something rare, something real, and neither was willing to let it go. In the comments, leave your rating from 1 to 10 for this story. Your feedback is incredibly important. The more you rate, the more stories like this I can bring to the channel. So don't forget, write your rating and share your thoughts. Your participation makes all the difference and helps improve the content. If you want to see more emotional, gripping stories full of twists like this one, drop your rating now. Seriously, I'll be watching the comments. This story is far more than just an adventure on a mountain. It's a tale about confronting hidden truths, unspoken desires, and the choices that define who we are. Graham and Victor, two men trapped in the roles society expects of them, found themselves in an isolated, extreme situation that forced them to face their innermost feelings. While battling the storm outside, They also wrestled with the storms within, discovering a connection they could no longer ignore. How often do we suppress our deepest feelings to meet the expectations of others? Graham and Victor's journey reminds us that sometimes life's most challenging moments can lead to true freedom. Yet, that freedom comes with its own weight. How do we balance who we truly are with the responsibilities we carry? It's a question many of us face silently, and this story challenges us to consider the price of authenticity. The beauty of this story lies in its reminder that life isn't a straight path. Behind every choice and struggle, there's the potential for self-discovery. Graham and Victor didn't just survive the storm. They faced their contradictions head-on, finding something rare and profound: the courage to live a moment of truth. And the most surprising part? This story is based on real events. That's right. One of our followers shared their experience in the comments, and we turned it into this video. Here on the channel, we bring powerful, emotional stories like this to life. If you have an amazing story, something that happened to you or someone you know, share it in the comments. Your story could be the next one featured in a video here. And don't forget, leave your rating from 1 to 10 for this story. Your feedback is crucial to help us continue creating stories that touch hearts, inspire, and connect people. I'm counting on you.